When you're dealing with an avoidant, you have to understand one brutal truth. They will never admit their love for you when they feel like they're in control. Control is their drug. It's the shield they hide behind, the armor they wear to make sure no one gets too close. And as long as they believe they're dictating the rules of the game, how close you can come, how much affection you're allowed to show, how much of themselves they're willing to give, you will never hear the words you're waiting for. But something fascinating happens when that illusion begins to slip. Suddenly, the ground underneath them isn't so steady anymore, and the same person who acted so untouchable, so indifferent, starts to feel something they've been running from all along, the reality that you are not theirs to control. Think about this for a moment. Most people assume that avoidants admit love when they feel safe, when everything is calm. Wrong. That's when they shut down the most. They're allergic to comfort because comfort means vulnerability. The truth is, an avoidant only admits their love when the tension inside of them becomes unbearable, when the walls they've built around their emotions start cracking, and the thought of losing you forever terrifies them more than the thought of giving up their control. It's in the silence, in the distance, in the moments where you stop chasing. That's when control slips. That's when they can't predict you anymore. And unpredictability is the very thing that forces the truth out of them. Here's the psychology behind it. Control gives them the illusion of power, but love is the ultimate loss of control. Love means surrender. It means admitting that someone else matters enough to affect how you feel, to change your state of being, to influence your decisions. That's terrifying to a person who has built their entire identity on staying detached. So what happens when you refuse to be predictable, when you refuse to be manipulated by silence or distance? You turn the tables. They thought silence would make you crawl back, but instead, you rise. They thought withholding affection would break you, but instead, you glow. And now, they're confronted with a nightmare they never saw coming. Their control has collapsed, and you're no longer waiting for them to decide when you're worthy of love. And that's the exact moment the confession spills out. Not because they suddenly became brave, not because they had an epiphany about romance, but because the very structure they built to protect themselves has crumbled. It's the loss of control that pushes them to reveal the feelings they swore they'd never admit. Understand something, an avoidance love doesn't show up in the early stages of power. It shows up when they're stripped bare, when their silence no longer controls you, when their emotional distance no longer defines you, when you've proven through your actions that you don't need their validation to breathe, to succeed, or to rise higher. That's when they can't hold it back anymore. So if you're waiting for an avoidant to tell you they love you, stop looking for it in the moments where you're bending, twisting, and begging for closeness. You'll never hear it there. You'll only hear it when you've pulled back, when you've reclaimed your own life, and when their illusion of control collapses like a house of cards. That's when their truth slips out raw and unpolished, because it can't stay hidden anymore. And here's the part that will shock you. When an avoidant admits love, it's not an act of generosity. It's an act of desperation. It's the moment they realize they don't own the board anymore, and the very person they thought they could keep at arm's length is now the one person they can't afford to lose. Remember this, love is not revealed in the safety of control. It's revealed in the collapse of it. When the mask breaks, when the silence loses its power, when the game ends, that's when the truth comes out. And if you want that truth, don't chase it. Don't beg for it. Stand firm, stand tall, and let their control slip. Because only when they lose control will they finally admit what they've been hiding all along. Freedom. That's the holy grail for an avoidant. If you want to understand why they act the way they do, you have to see it clearly. They will sacrifice intimacy, connection, even long-term happiness, if it means they get to protect their independence. Their entire nervous system is wired around this obsession with freedom. To them, love looks like a trap, closeness feels like suffocation, and commitment feels like chains. But here's where it gets interesting. As long as freedom feels like the bigger prize, they will never admit their love for you. Why? Because love is the one thing that makes them feel vulnerable, dependent, and exposed. Love challenges their illusion of self-sufficiency. Love demands surrender, and surrender is the enemy of their identity. Yet every human being, no matter how distant, no matter how guarded, is wired for connection. That need cannot be erased, only delayed. And the avoidant eventually hits a point where the equation changes. Suddenly, the thought of losing you becomes heavier, scarier, more suffocating than the fear of commitment. That's the tipping point. That's the moment their silence breaks, their walls tremble, and the truth slips out of their mouth, often in a way they never planned. It doesn't happen when you're begging them to stay. It doesn't happen when you're chasing them, sending long messages, or trying to convince them of your worth. That behavior only reassures them. I'm safe. They won't leave. I still have control. But when you step back, when you show them through your actions that you're willing to walk away, the scales begin to tilt. The thought of you living your life without them, the image of you being loved by someone else, the reality of you not being available to return whenever they feel like it. Suddenly, that's more terrifying than commitment itself. And that's when you see a side of them that shocks you. The person who spent months, maybe years, avoiding emotional closeness will suddenly start confessing things they swore they'd never say. Not because they've suddenly overcome all their fears, but because the fear of losing you outweighs the fear of intimacy. This is where human psychology gets fascinating. Most people assume love is about romance, about chemistry, about the butterflies. But underneath all of that, love is about survival. It's about meaning. And when an avoidant realizes that life without you feels like emptiness, they start to face the truth that their so-called freedom is actually just loneliness in disguise. Their independence becomes a prison, and suddenly the bars are closing in. So here's what you need to understand. You don't earn an avoidance love by convincing them, by proving your loyalty, or by endlessly forgiving their distance. You earn it, if you can call it earning it, by refusing to be their safety net. By stepping back into your own power, you force them to confront a question they've been running from their entire life. Do I value my freedom more, or do I value this person more? And make no mistake, the moment they feel that fear of losing you, everything changes. That's when the heart speaks louder than the walls. That's when the truth comes out, not as a calm, poetic declaration, but often as a desperate, unpolished confession, because for the first time, their fear of loss has become greater than their fear of closeness. It's a paradox. The very people who run the fastest from love end up the most shaken by the thought of losing it. The very ones who appear the strongest alone often admit, in a rare crack of honesty, that life without you is unbearable. And when that moment comes, it's not because they suddenly became fearless. It's because their freedom no longer feels worth the price of losing you. So if you want the avoidant to admit their love, stop trying to compete with their freedom. You'll never win that game. Instead, let them taste what life is like without you. Let them feel the emptiness of the independence they idolize. Because when the fear of losing you finally outweighs the fear of closeness, that's when you'll hear the words they've buried all along. And here's the truth to leave you with. An avoidant only chooses love when the pain of freedom becomes greater than the fear of surrender. There is one thing that rattles an avoidant more than your words, more than your pleas, more than your silence, and that's the sight of you thriving without them. Because for the avoidant, their power has always lived in the assumption that you need them. They convince themselves that no matter how much distance they create, no matter how much they withdraw, you'll still be waiting in the background, orbiting around their indifference. But when they see you rising, when they see you glowing, evolving, building a life that's not only full but magnetic without their presence, that's when something inside them fractures. Suddenly, the story they've been telling themselves doesn't hold up anymore. The person they thought they could keep on standby is no longer waiting. And that image of you independent, radiant, unstoppable, becomes the mirror that forces them to confront their own denial. Here's the psychology behind it. Avoidants are not immune to love. They're not immune to longing. They're not immune to the ache of connection. They suppress it, yes, but they feel it just like anyone else. And when you thrive without them, it triggers a deep, almost existential fear. The fear of being irrelevant in the life of someone who once made them feel safe, desired, wanted. You need to see how powerful this is. While you were in their orbit, they could minimize you. They could pretend that your love wasn't that important, that your presence wasn't essential. But when you step out of that orbit and start shining on your own, suddenly they realize that the very thing they dismissed is the very thing they can't stop thinking about. And in that moment, love, raw, undeniable love, pushes through the cracks in their armor. It doesn't happen when you chase. It doesn't happen when you beg them to see your worth. That only keeps their illusion of power intact. It happens when you stop performing for their attention and start living for yourself. When your focus shifts from how do I make them see me to how do I elevate my life, the entire dynamic changes. Your success, your joy, your energy, it disrupts the script they've been living by. And here's where the paradox shows up again. An avoidant will resist admitting their feelings when you're available, but the moment they see you unavailable to their old patterns, when you no longer need them to feel whole, that's when they finally see you with new eyes. It's as if your independence wakes up the part of them that's been asleep all along. They start to realize, if I don't admit this, if I don't claim this, I might lose them forever. That's the moment love spills out, and often it's messy. It won't sound like a perfect confession. It might come out as anger, jealousy, or even panic. Because the truth is, when they see you thriving, they don't just see your strength. They see their own weakness. They see that their defenses, their silence, their games didn't break you. Instead, they built you. And now they're staring at the one thing they never expected, the possibility that you don't need them at all. And that, right there, is the breaking point. When they realize your life is bigger, bolder, and brighter without them, the fear of irrelevance becomes unbearable. That's when the words they've buried finally rise to the surface. I love you. Not because they suddenly discovered it, but because they could no longer ignore what's been burning inside them all along. So never underestimate the power of your own growth. Never think that pulling back, thriving, and elevating yourself is just about moving on. It's also the mirror that forces the avoidant to see what they've denied. When you shine without them, you shatter the illusion that they were the center of your world. And in that shattering, their truth finally breaks free. And here's what you must hold on to. Love is never revealed when you're waiting for it. It's revealed when you no longer need it. Thrive, rise, and glow. And watch how even the most avoidant can no longer deny what their heart has been screaming all along. There is something about silence that terrifies an avoidant more than any confrontation, more than any emotional plea, more than any attempt to reason with them. Because silence isn't empty, it's loaded. It's a statement without words, a mirror without distortion. And when you stop chasing, when you stop explaining, when you stop trying to pull emotion out of them, your silence becomes the one thing they cannot control. Think about it. Begging, pleading, even arguing. All of that still keeps the avoidant comfortable. Why? Because it tells them they matter. It reassures them that no matter how far they run, you'll still reach for them. Every text you send, every attempt you make to fix the relationship, it reinforces their belief that they can keep withholding without consequence. They know exactly how you'll respond, and predictability is their shield. But silence breaks that pattern. Silence removes the script. Suddenly, they don't know what you're thinking. They don't know what you're feeling. And most importantly, they don't know if you're still there. And for someone who has built their entire identity around staying untouchable, that unpredictability is terrifying. Silence is not passive. It's active. It's disruptive. It's a declaration of self-worth. Because it says, without words, I refuse to perform for your attention. I refuse to beg for what should be given freely. I refuse to shrink myself just so you can feel safe in your distance. And when that message comes through, even if you never speak it aloud, the avoidant feels it. Here's the psychology behind it. Avoidants thrive in distance because they believe distance gives them power. But silence creates a new kind of distance, one that they didn't choose, one that they don't control. It flips the script. Suddenly, you're the one who isn't reaching. You're the one who isn't chasing. And they're the one wondering, what's happening? Why aren't they reacting? That confusion forces them inward. And in that inward moment, the truth they've been running from starts echoing louder than ever. The irony is that words often give them an escape. You can say, I love you, I want you, I need you. And they'll twist those words into reassurance for themselves. But when you go quiet, when the begging ends, when the desperate energy stops flowing their way, they can no longer escape their own thoughts. Silence forces them to confront the very emotions they've been burying. And here's the breakthrough. That's when their love begins to surface. Not because your silence manipulates them, but because it exposes the depth of their own feelings. They begin to realize that your absence is not peaceful. It's painful. They realize that the silence isn't just space, it's a void. And in that void, the denial collapses. So if you're wondering when an avoidant admits their love, it's often in the aftermath of silence, when your absence screams louder than your words ever could, when the energy they once took for granted is no longer there. That's when they finally admit what they've been suppressing all along. And here's what's powerful: silence doesn't just reveal their love, it restores your strength. It shifts the dynamic. It reminds you that your value is not tied to their recognition, that your worth doesn't need their approval. And when you stand in that power, you don't just reclaim your dignity, you trigger theirs. Because only then, when the noise is gone, when the begging is gone, when the performance is gone, do they realize what they've been running from: love that was real, love that was steady, love they may never find again. Silence is not weakness. Silence is wisdom. It's not retreat. It's revelation. It doesn't push them away. It reveals whether they were ever willing to come closer on their own. And the truth is simple: when words fail, when chasing fails, when every attempt falls flat, your silence becomes the thunder that shakes their walls. Remember this: sometimes the loudest confession of love an avoidant will ever make happens only after the silence you chose. Avoidants survive on one thing: defense mechanisms. Distance, coldness, sarcasm, detachment. These are not random habits, they are strategies. Each wall they build is designed to protect them from the one thing they fear most: being vulnerable. They've learned to use silence as a weapon, withdrawal as a shield, and emotional shutdown as a way of keeping control. But here's what happens that changes everything: when they realize their defenses don't work on you. That's when their entire reality begins to crack. You see, their patterns are built on expectation. If they pull away, they expect you to chase. If they go cold, they expect you to fight harder for warmth. If they withdraw, they expect you to bend, to compromise, to prove your worth over and over again. Every defense they use is meant to provoke a predictable reaction, a response that reassures them, I'm still in control. But when you don't play that game, when their silence doesn't bait you, when their coldness doesn't make you collapse, when their withdrawal doesn't send you spiraling, that's when the script they've been running their whole life starts falling apart. And in that collapse, something deeper is exposed, the love they've been hiding. Because here's the truth. Avoidants are not as strong as they pretend. Their walls aren't signs of strength. They're signs of fragility. The armor exists because they fear being broken. And every time they realize their defenses no longer work on you, they are confronted with the fact that you see beyond the armor. You see the person underneath. And that terrifies them because it means you're relating to them not through their fear, but through their truth. Think about this. If every time they go silent, you still chase them, then their defense mechanism is validated. It works. But the moment you stop chasing, when you sit in your power, when you choose calm over panic, suddenly they feel powerless. Their weapon backfires. And what's left? Raw honesty. No games, no shields, no masks. This is where an avoidant admits their love, not when their defenses succeed, but when they fail. Not when they can keep you spinning, but when you refuse to spin at all. Because now they face a choice they've been avoiding. Do they keep pretending, or do they admit the truth before you walk away? And most of the time, that's when the words they've been burying come forward. It might not sound like poetry. It might not even sound calm. Sometimes it comes out as anger, sometimes as a desperate reach, sometimes as a confession blurted out in a moment of panic. But make no mistake, it comes out because their defenses, the very mechanisms that kept them safe, no longer give them safety. This is where the philosophical depth kicks in. Defense mechanisms are illusions. They promise safety, but deliver emptiness. They promise control, but deliver isolation. And when you rise above their games, you expose the illusion for what it is. You prove that true strength isn't in manipulation or control. It's in authenticity, in showing up without hiding. And in that exposure, they finally admit love, because they can no longer deny the power of connection when their walls fall flat. So, don't underestimate what happens when you stop feeding into their patterns. Every time you hold your ground, every time you refuse to be manipulated by their silence or distance, you're not just protecting yourself, you're dismantling their belief that hiding works. And once that belief collapses, their truth rises. Remember this, avoidants admit their love not when their defenses succeed, but when their defenses fail. They don't confess in moments of control. They confess in moments of collapse. And the moment they realize their strategies no longer bend you, that's when they're left with only one choice: to finally reveal the love they've been terrified to show. The greatest punishment for an avoidant is not what you say, not what you do, but what they do to themselves. Because loneliness is the monster they think they can tame. But eventually, it devours them from the inside. They build their walls, they create distance, they convince themselves that silence equals safety. But here's the paradox. What they run toward is the very thing that ends up haunting them. In the beginning, their solitude feels powerful. It feels like freedom. No obligations, no vulnerability, no pressure to show up emotionally. They believe they've won. But slowly, that solitude stops feeling like liberation and starts feeling like exile. And exile, over time, begins to suffocate. Here's why. Human beings are wired for connection. It's not optional. It's survival. We thrive when we feel seen, known, and valued. An avoidant may resist that truth longer than most, but they can't escape it. And when they've withdrawn so much that even you, the one who cared, the one who tried, are no longer there, the silence they once celebrated becomes unbearable. And that's when loneliness turns on them. That's when their own walls become their prison. They begin to realize that the very strategies they used to protect themselves are the same strategies that left them abandoned, not by others first, but by their own choices. Picture this moment. They're sitting in the quiet, maybe convincing themselves they don't care. But the mind doesn't lie for long. Late at night, when distractions fade, when the noise of the world goes quiet, they feel the ache. They feel the void. They feel the presence of your absence. And that's when their inner voice gets louder, saying the words they've refused to admit. I love them. I need them. And I may have pushed away the very thing I can't live without. It's in that moment, when the loneliness they built starts to eat away at them, that confessions slip out. Because love is no longer a choice. It's a necessity. It's no longer something they can run from. It's the only antidote to the pain their own avoidance created. Understand this: avoidants are not immune to consequence. Their walls have a price, and the price is always the same: emptiness. And when emptiness grows too heavy, it forces them to confront what they denied all along. That's why so many avoidants circle back, why they return after silence, why they admit love after months or even years. Because the loneliness they thought was their friend eventually betrays them. And here's what's powerful for you to realize: you don't have to break down their walls for this to happen. You don't have to convince them, heal them, or beg them to admit what they feel. Time itself does the work. Life itself delivers the lesson. Because loneliness is patient, and eventually it catches up. So if you're waiting for an avoidant to admit their love, understand this: it often doesn't happen in the heat of connection, but in the chill of isolation. It's when the silence they created stops protecting them and starts punishing them. It's when their fortress of solitude becomes a cage. That's when they finally break, and that's when their truth comes out. And it often sounds desperate, sometimes unplanned, sometimes explosive. But the authenticity is real because it's not coming from a place of control anymore. It's coming from survival. They admit their love not because they suddenly became fearless, but because their fear of being alone forever finally outweighed their fear of closeness. Remember, this loneliness is the teacher they can't escape. It's the mirror they can't shatter. And eventually, it's the voice that forces them to whisper or shout the one thing they never wanted to say: I love you. And that's the ultimate truth. You don't need to chase. You don't need to beg. You don't need to prove. Their own loneliness will do the work for you. So hold your ground, because the silence they created will one day turn on them, and in that moment, their love will no longer be a secret. It will be their only confession.